All right, good to see you. Well, I don't really see all of you. Good to have you here. I see all the names. So, good turnout here. Thank you all. Let's just take a moment to check in. We just had another week. We were engaged in this practice of being mindful of wholesome and unwholesome activities, virtuous, non-virtuous. We had a half-day retreat on Sunday. So I want to just check in first, see how your practice is going, anything that's come up during practice. You can just raise your hand and I'll see it over here and can invite you to share if you have something that you've been reflecting on or something that's come up in practice, teachings. Okay, nobody yet. Well, the invitation is there. So like joy dialogue, make sure that we're engaged with our practice and how this applies. If you're new, we have been going through the book, How to Practice. You might see it backwards, do the video, but How to Practice, The Way of Meaningful Life by His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama. Incredible text of essentially the Four Noble Truths. And we've been on the second truth and the cause of suffering. So we've worked our way through quite a bit. We got to the karmas and the kleshas, the afflictive states of mind. So we've been working with avoiding those unwholesome activities that lead to these karmic imprints, which, these afflictive states and the karma that gets created. So how can we engage more mindfully in our lives with more presence of mind, more opportunity to cultivate these virtuous activities of body, speech, and mind, and avoid the non-virtuous ones. And now we're actually at a point in this text that he's going to talk about, well, what happens at the end of life. So really functional text. This book is something His Holiness, is just incredibly thoughtful about, well, here's what you need to know. Here's the structure. Here's how it works. And then very thoughtful practices for us to engage in. So incredible text. The page that we'd wind up in here, I think it's 48, the process of dying. So it's a bit, and we have been reading. And something to note that Tibetan Buddhists have got this down, this whole process of studying and practicing this whole process of death. So what happens when the body dies and what happens to the consciousness and how it continues. So there's a lot of wisdom poured into this, a lot of teachings and guidance so they can be prepared to die. And so if we have the truth of suffering, the samsara that we're caught up in, the cause of suffering, have this confusion that gives rise these misperceptions, these afflictions, and we create these karmas, and we keep this cycle. We have a rare and precious human rebirth right now. Right now we have the opportunity to cut through all that. And so we can be working on that right here, right now. As we transition from this body, and this body ends, well, we may not have achieved enlightenment. We might, have this karma that's going to carry through to a new birth. And hopefully we've had, the conditions that have given rise and ripened for another rare and precious human rebirth. So we can continue this spiritual path and this awakening. So that's doable, and that's doable based on what we're doing now. Are we, what are the seeds we're cultivating? What are the attitudes and thoughts and habits and activities that we're connecting to, engaging with, doing a lot? So if you think of karma again as what I do a lot, I tend to continue to do. Habits get created. So we can be creating the habit of cultivating good karma. We can create the habit of developing wisdom. We can create the karma of a practitioner. And so that will naturally be the conditions that can ripen as we continue into a next life. Excuse me. Let me mute this real quick. We'll see how I do there. So as this body ends, the consciousness continues, and the seeds that we've been cultivating, carry on, and they'll ripen. So they'll ripen into becoming of a new rebirth, and how we come into the world, and again start shaping our experience, how we're experiencing our world, and this will be a continuation. So what we're doing now, if you want to know how your future is, well, look at how you're living your life now. One of the great verses, I think it was Shantideva, could have been Tisha. So don't quote me, because I'm quoting somebody. But this verse I thought was just so wonderful. So many people want to know about what I used to be or what I'll be like, divinations and liberation of the palm of your hand. This great pithy little quote. Why do people go and ask all these lamas and wonder about where they've been and where they're going? If you want to know what your past was like, look at your life today. Because it was based on all of that conditioning that I have in life today. And if you want to know what your future's like, look at your life today. What are you doing? What are you cultivating? So rather than have our mind caught up in all that, what are we doing today? What are we cultivating? What are we growing? And this is, just like anything, the habits we have in this lifetime, they get very strong. And we have a propensity to act or think in a particular way. Well, naturally, this would continue. So it's like that. It's not super mystical. So it's valuable in this very lifetime to make sure, and that's why we're in the third thought and the four thoughts. When we do that practice every morning, is at the time of death, karma, takes its hold, and so avoid unwholesome and engage in wholesome activities, right? So we can be doing this. So at the time of death, as karma takes its hold, we'll be carried in a way that is conducive to continuing our path. And having said that, we may not be thinking about our death very often, or we might think of it fleetingly. But if we're really looking beyond this life, thinking about the bigger journey, then this life, becomes very important. And how do I use this life wisely? I find this really invaluable because regardless of your belief system, whether you're Buddhist, Catholic, some other Christian or atheist, doesn't really matter. At the time of death, what's going to matter? So if I'm a Buddhist and I'm looking at this idea of beyond this life and a continuum, well, I have this rare and precious life right now, and I can use this for that journey. That's what matters, this path of awakening. If I'm Christian, I want to go to heaven, well, I'm going to use this life to go to heaven, right? It's not just about getting stuff in this life, whether I'm a Buddhist or a Christian. also someone maybe doesn't believe in life after death. It could be an atheist, could be lots of different types of people don't believe in that. Well, the question still remains, what's going to matter at the end of life? Right? How you lived it's going to matter. None of that stuff's going to go with you. So as we step back from the worldly concerns and how do I make this life at this moment, bigger house, car, whatever I want, what's the purpose of my life and what will matter at the time of death? And so really valuable to have a bigger perspective, some clarity. As in Buddhism, there's a very clear, just actually it's very specific, we'll touch on it, what happens at the time of death and how the consciousness will take a new form. So it gets very detailed. We're not going to get into super specifics just because, I'm not that qualified. We can go through the basics as Holiness touches in here and have an overview of what happens. But this is, something they study. It's something well documented, something very clear, very precise, but practiced for, over 1,000 years. So really have this refined. Excuse me, just a moment here. I get congested in this Dharma center. Must be something. So, any questions to this point? Because starting to touch on some things. If so, always just raise your hand. There's a raise your hand button. I'll see it. And we can. Okay, nobody yet. So the process of dying. And again, I think it was, let's see, 40. Oh, I changed the page. Process of dying, 48 on. So let me just give you an overview. I think that'll be a good use of our time as it goes quickly. So at the time of death, our body's going to die. And here the Tibetans have been really able to identify and explain these processes of what happens. And at first, the earth element dissolves. And there's specific mental states that apply with each. So we're going from a very gross mental state to a very subtle mental state of consciousness. And at this first one, the earth element dissolves. And there's descriptions. I'll actually use my cheat sheet here. What you see is kind of mirage-like. I don't want to get any of this wrong. Earth element dissolves. So when you get into the text, it tells you what it feels like, all that, what you'll see and so forth. Very descriptive. Earth element dissolves into water. Water element dissolves. During the water element, just like smoke, like puffs, like a chimney coming out. That dissolves in a more subtle state of mind and into fire element, which here they have like fireflies kind of sparkling about, which goes down into wind element, which dissolves into the wind, which they have here is like the flame of a candle. And as that dissolves, that's when sort of Western medicine, they would say you're dead. But at that point, the consciousness is still within the body, and the consciousness actually goes from a flickering flame to a solid flame. The mind, it goes in. So that's the first four, and they relate to these elements. They each dissolve sequentially. And then now we're just in a subtle consciousness. And this is just white, clear white light. So vivid, it's just all pure white, which will dissolve into sort of a red-orange, which will then, that mind goes to black, this darkness. So each is getting more and more subtle state of consciousness, and eventually will dissolve into what we call clear light. Clear life, most subtle form. It's the one that takes us to the next manifestation. It's this clear light, and the clear light can happen really quick. Can happen for a while, but it's the most subtle. And so Tibetan Lamas will practice this, so they're very familiar with this process. And again, this is just an overview, and you get clear light. We'll often miss the clear light because we're not very attuned and aware during this whole process. But Tibetan Lamas will practice through meditation, going through all of these dissolutions and resting in clear light and being aware of it, being familiar with it. So when they die, unlike you and I probably, they will be conscious through the whole process, and they'll use that mind of clear light to their as a spiritual tool, and they'll be able to actually be conscious through the whole intermediate state, and choose consciously a new life. And so there's a continuity there where they haven't lost the consciousness, and through the intermediate state, and then take a new form. Us, we generally, if we're not trained that way, kind of just go through it, and then intermediate state and new life. And we don't have much memory, if any at all, from previous, and so the process we're not going to be very conscious for. But they trained for this. His Holiness says here in the book, so every day he meditates on this 6 times a day. So he goes through these dissolutions 6 times a day. It's usually 3 times in the morning, 3 times in the evening. And so these lamas will practice this, and again, much more detail. This is just a brief overview of becoming aware and conscious of the process that happens at the time of death, and then remaining conscious. So throughout, and utilizing the clear light, this most potent, subtle consciousness, and then a new life. And so at that point, he would go through an intermediate state. Don't know how long it's going to be. The sort of text on that, could be pretty quick. Could be, right into a new womb, and or it could be weeks. Typically, we have. I have a little thing there. I'm not sure I can mute that. Let me see if you can still hear. Nope, you can't hear me. All right. Actually, let me test that. I don't want. Can you hear me if I'm talking now? And I'll see if I get a chat message. Excellent. So you could hear me. So I'm going to mute the speaker on my computer, because that way the pop-ups will make noise. All right. Thank you. So the length of time, intermediate state, that's where I was. Could be, they're pretty quick. Could be an hour, could be 3 hours, could be a week. And it said that in this intermediate state, that's kind of, things look spacey and very different. You might be there 7 days. If you're there 7 days and you haven't taken a new birth, then it goes through a cycle again. And but the most be 7 days and then go through another cycle. And so they say that the maximum would be 49 days. So generally when someone transitions, someone that we praying for, we'll pray for 49 days. We'll have, some connection to that just to cover the whole span of the intermediate process. It said that we do actually have an impact karmically, and prayers matter during those times. So we might be praying for 49 days and they may already be in the new womb and all that, but just to cover all the bases, that'd be the longest typically. And then we're drawn karmically to sexual activity, to sperm and egg, and this coming together. And at that time of fertilization, consciousness is drawn and then forming. And right now I'm talking about for a human one specifically. It's a similar process. We don't have to be human next life. And then a birth will come. So therein lies the process. We're going to be drawn karmically to, again, people, probably that we've interacted with, and that there's a reason for us to be connected with. And so our karma is going to just run this whole show unless we have some ability to influence that, to maintain consciousness, to have more choice. And that goes on autopilot, and it's all karma. So this section on karma becomes extremely relevant. So he's going to this point to let you know what's happening, that right now I'm creating my future lives. All of this matters. And then, a new birth happens. So it's clear, right? Everybody's got that. Check on any questions, any hands. Quiet group today. Let's see. Now, what I think would be helpful at this point, we got a little time. How do we know any of this is true or not true? And I think those are valid questions. I think we need to investigate what makes sense, use reasoning, and investigate. So, where do these texts come from? Who shares them? Why would they share them? Does anyone know anyone who's done this? And so within the Tibetan traditions, there's going to be, quite a few people who know people who've done this. And then these texts and the trainings have gone on for a long time. But it could seem pretty otherworldly to us if we haven't. And so maybe that's a big leap. And so what makes sense is, maybe I could start with, I do notice that when I think, say, do a lot, I tend to think, say, do more. I do notice that the conditioning of my earlier life plays a role in who I am today. I do notice that I have certain tendencies of people I'm drawn to and not drawn to and so forth, based on my past. And so I can start to see this lifetime, whether there's a next lifetime, karmically, the seeds that I water and grow, they're going to condition me, and they're going to be very difficult to shift out away from new habits and so forth. And there's an inertia. So anyone who's trying to cultivate a new habit or even learn to meditate or anything, you're going to see it's effortful. So these processes, we can recognize our own lifetime that, if we're open to the idea of beyond that, do we know anybody? Is there any reason for a teacher to tell me something that would be true from their experience and so forth? And we can go, is there anyone that I think of as role models that, live and embody these things? Do they have more peace? Do they have more well-being? So forth. We start, investigating on our own journey, finding teachings and teachers that make sense. that seem logical and reasonable and so forth. And that we may cultivate some faith. And so from a personal side, I'll just share my own personal story. When I became a monk, I traveled to India, and I got to sit with a geshe who took really good care of me, really sweet, incredible bodhisattva. It's really wonderful. And he shared his experience of coming to the monastery when he was young, and his journey, and when he was a monk younger, and he heard these stories and what happens to an old Lama and how they transition, how they stay in a meditative state, how they go through these processes consciously, and how they stay conscious and stay in the clear light, and how they can maintain a continuity and then be recognized as the next incarnation of that being. And so he was, he's like, I need to know this makes sense, it is true. And so when one of the High Lamas transitioned, he had volunteered to be attendant, volunteered to do that whole process. He wanted to see it for himself. So there's no particular reason for him to tell me this. We were just up one night, sharing the story. Forget what brought it up. I have it all written down in my little journal from back to 2005. And it basically described this whole process of a Lama, going to meditative state, and his body dying, different things, the signs that they see, and then he stayed in clear light meditation for a long time, for days, actually a long time, more than usual. And then he talked about, them having to kind of nudge him along, and then the consciousness left the body, and it's miraculous, process was taking place, and he volunteered for the pujas, volunteered for how they dress the body and all the ritual, and they burn it in a very specific way and seal it up afterwards. And he told me about the mandala they put underneath, and the signs that they look for, little relics after these days of ritual, and then pulling off this bowl and see the in the sand down at the bottom, a little footprint, a little footprint that is a sign of rebirth. It was a small footprint, quick rebirth, big footprint, long time. You just saw these things, and they're all written down. So he told me this fabulous journey that he experienced, this fabulous experience. And I was fascinated. I wrote it all down. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. That happens here in Church in India. And then, as many of you know, when my teacher died, that same thing happened. And this time, I was there when he transitioned. I was there, doing prayers and rituals during his 3 days in clear light. And then the rainbows that appeared when consciousness left. And part of a crew that accompanied his holy body back to India, they did these rituals. Everything just manifests in miraculous ways. There's an article that we posted on our website, which I'll have Aaron post on our community, of a monk who was by his side during the whole time, who wrote this wonderful article about everything that happened in great detail, and he was with him the whole time. And so who knew, I was listening to this Geshe tell me stories, and years later I'm going through this whole same process with my own teacher. And so, for me, it's a little different because I have had this experience. But again, you don't know that because you have your own experiences and so forth. So, and I'm not here to tell you this is how it is or isn't. That's what has been taught to me, and I share a bit of my own personal experience in that process. But whichever way we investigate the principles are the same, whether we take on and understand the potential of our mind to consciously guide our next life, or if we recognize the opportunity now to just start cultivating habits and tendencies and attitudes that will naturally carry us through when we're not very conscious for that next life, or whether we cultivate attitudes and tendencies and habits in this very life that will make this very life much more resilient, much less suffering, because I'm not as confused and I'm not creating all that turmoil in my mind, karma and anxiety and fear that's based on something that is fundamentally not true, this independent way I'm seeing the world. And so we can eliminate a lot of that suffering in this very life, which can transition to the next. So what I find about this just incredibly powerful is that he's laying out the structure this way it is, and it's functional whether you don't believe in the next life, whether you do believe in the next life, whether you think that you may reach an ability to be at that state through a transition or not. Because we can continually right now be creating those conditions that will just happen more naturally at the time of death as we cultivate compassion and wisdom and some realization around the interdependent nature of our experience. We're watering all those imprints. So really important to pay attention to what we're doing now. No matter who we are, no matter what we believe in terms of a life, just modern Western psychology, you're going to have a better life in this lifetime. Beyond this lifetime, you can set yourself up for a way to die without regret, and to die in a manner in which your karma has been conditioned to pull you along in a conducive way as part of your spiritual journey. So the body ends, but our path continues. So let me pause there and see if anyone has a thought, a question, a curiosity. Give me time to take a drink. All right, I just had a hand, but I think it went away. Oh, there we go, a hand. Let's see here. Ruth, I'm going to get you in here. Okay, Ruth, just unmute and you're ready to go.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can't hear you because I turned my speaker off. That's why. Hold on one sec. When I turned my speaker off, you could still hear me, but I would not be able to hear you. Okay, now I can hear you.
Okay, as I chatted in, this is helpful to me. I appreciate it. I was curious about people who die suddenly or in a violent act and what, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so again, karma's going to take its course, right? So I didn't have a lot of time to prepare, have good thoughts. However, having said that, one of the strong catalyzing effects, for the transition is the state of mind right at the time of death. So it's not determinate. It's not, just because I have that state of mind, I'm going to be like this. But the state of mind right at the moment of death is going to have an influence, a trajectory. So in general, when you know someone is passing, and we do know when we have time, it's not sudden. We really, as Buddhists, though, all the training is to really make that person happy, comfortable. There's no crying, there's no grieving, there's really a celebration, a peace and an ease, prayers, comfort, whatever, if they're not Buddhist, even like with my mom, Catholic prayers and the rosary and things that are comforting and peaceful and easy. So you really would like to have that mind. If we can die with the mind of compassion and kindness, I mean, strong, just rolls you off in the right direction. Suddenly, you may not have that mind, right? Fear, might be that, especially if it's violent, painful and fearful. So that's going to have an impact on the sort of the trajectory that the karma takes. I kind of think of it as, a ball's getting pushed off, like, well, which way does it get pushed, but it's going to correct based on the course, and all the karma. But there's kind of a push and it starts off in a particular way. So the more optimal would be to, to have a really compassionate, accepting, spacious mind when we transition. Sudden or violently, it's going to be really hard, but not impossible. I think I've shared the story. I know I've shared the story a lot of times, but when I was going to India, I thought I was going to die because the plane, was just dropped, and I woke up to watching a guy bounce off the ceiling and the plane going. That's pretty sudden. I woke up, and my mind was once it got its concept of, oh, this is it. It was pretty peaceful. It was pretty peaceful. So I didn't plan that. Just it was pretty peaceful. So we can, and that's why I think the practices that we can engage in now around death are so important. So when death comes, it's not a big deal. It's just the end of this body. That's all it is. It's not the end. This is one day of 1 week of 1 year of one life of eons of lifetimes. We don't need to be so attached to this life. We want to make good use of this life, but at some point it's going to end. And so the more peaceful we are about that, the more we have our death meditations. We get used to dying, and that's just dying. It's not even these higher practices of tantra, and so we can practice these now. And I encourage people to the 9-point death meditation. Our 4 thoughts that we do every day in the short practice, we recognize that like a water bubble. People are dying, we'll die. So that when it comes, it's not a shock and it's not scary. And even if it's sudden, it's just, oh, okay. And this body's going. No reason to grab on. Violently, going to be a lot harder because you're going to be in pain. And so that takes a lot of work. Now, having said all that, that's with us specifically. When someone else dies violently or dies suddenly, for us to think we have any clue about what that's about or what their next life is going to be or any of that, don't even try. We have no idea. We don't know if that person was a Buddha in a human form in a particular way that showed up in a certain way. I mean, karma is this complicated web of things and experiences and the way things form. We can't see another's mind, and we don't know the full story of our journey here. We just talk about, specifically, the way karma works, the generalities of it, but it's always going to be a uniquely personal experience. So is that helpful?
So helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Anybody else have a thought or question? We're right up at the hour, but yep, we got another hand here if I can navigate. There we go. All right, Michelle, I think I got you mic'd.
Hey there, it's Michelle.
Hey.
So I have a question about our daily practice and the virtuous activities.
Uh-huh.
And I'm wondering if there's like more specific details about virtuous and non-virtuous, being that, like, this month maybe people aren't eating meat because it's Sakadawa, that kind of thing. Like whether you're a vegetarian or you eat meat, or whether like our minds as they are can justify and rationalize behaviors that maybe fall into some, in our opinion, gray area, but maybe it's more black and white and we just don't know. So I'm wondering if there are more specific guidelines as to virtuous, what specifically is and isn't virtuous behaviors in some of these areas.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, and clearly there are these teachings about virtuous and non-virtuous. So what I can do is post a link where it'll be broken down a lot more. So in the community where the daily practice is, I think I just have the list, right? And so we can have some elaboration. We will actually unpack them more, pretty sure, as we get into, the Noble Eightfold Path, where we're going to, get into the ethics and how that works. But there are some great, nice elaborations on each of these, and some good resources. We have some good resources. Two Good Children's really good at explaining those, as well as Alexander Berzin has some really good commentary. We probably have some from His Holiness as well. So we'll make sure to post those so we can study those more thoroughly.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the suggestion. That's really helpful. Okay, anybody else with a question? I'll tell you, come up with karma, death, transition, life after death, and nobody pops up. I think that's a first for me. So, all right, well, you had your chance. We're at 7:30. So I do encourage you, make sure read through the book. If you have any thoughts or questions around that, we will make sure to post up some more info on the virtuous and non-virtuous, and continue to engage in this practice. So those of you doing this practice every day, you can see why it's so important. Right? I mean, it's just foundational. Everything is foundational to who we get to meet in this lifetime. It's foundational to the conditions that we get to ripen. Ethics are so foundational, and the karma that we create, the conditions we nurture. So really getting into a habit of where you're habitually coming from a state of virtue instead of non-virtue. Think about what that would be like, and so that rolls out naturally. So we want to practice that. We want to practice that a lot. Let's see if I still have this little thing I was thinking about. No, we'll leave it at that. Okay. I was going to go on a whole other tangent, but I stopped myself. So I showed restraint. So each day, taking some time, setting our intention, motivating, and reminding ourselves of this opportunity. But also, studying these virtues, body, speech, and mind, knowing what to avoid, knowing what to cultivate. That's so much of Buddhism, knowing what to cultivate, knowing what to discard. Such, Theravada has that, Buddhism all has that. And that's really the journey, is really understanding what to cultivate in this lifetime and what to discard, so we make good use of this life. So these 10 are like foundation to everything. Really important, really important. And then we can create some habits, tendencies where karma takes its course. Well, wouldn't it be nice to have karma take its course in a wholesome, productive way, to just continuing to be able to engage in the path of awakening? So that's what the opportunity is here. Okay. All right. Well, let's see. Do I have any announcements? We're in Sakadawa right now. We're in the month of Sakadawa. And so just bearing that in mind, Michelle brought that up. And yeah, feel free to not eat meat any day, actually. Yeah, if we can prevent causing harm to any beings or as many as possible. Good idea. And whether it's Sakadao or not. And during this month is Buddha's birth and enlightenment and so forth. Very special time. Very special time. And I think it's June 5th, the actual day that we'll celebrate. I'll have to double check. But this month, very special time. Energetically, there's a lot of opportunity to shed that which is not working, to cultivate what is. And, obviously our pandemic provides this, but there's a unique sort of energy here this month. And so I encourage you to be as mindful as you can to really notice what we can shed and what we want to grow. All right. So again, practices are posted every day, the community, and I record those in the morning. Hopefully they're early enough for you. I try to get them all done before 5:30 and posted. And if we need them sooner, I can record them sooner, maybe the day before. And then here we will continue on Sunday, January Sig practice and our daily practice. And if you haven't got the book, I encourage you to get it. Make sure you study. Any questions we can talk about. All right. So let us dedicate merit and wisdom that we've accumulated here today and throughout our lifetimes. Let's dedicate this for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be free of suffering, find their liberation. May we be able to use the merit and wisdom accumulated here today and throughout our lifetimes to purify our own minds, to help us engage in this path of awakening, cultivating virtue and wisdom, so we can attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. May we also dedicate the merit and wisdom accumulated here today and throughout our lifetimes for the long life of all spiritual teachers of all spiritual traditions, authentically teaching the path of no more suffering. And a special dedication to the long life of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. May he live long, may his teachings flourish till we all attain enlightenment.